Tonight at 10, all options are on the table, says President Trump after North Korea fires a missile over Japan. Sirens sounded, warning people to take cover as the missile passed overhead. America's UN ambassador says enough is enough.
It's unacceptable. They have violated every single UN Security Council resolution that we've had. And so I think something serious has to happen.
It was the latest missile test by North Korea in defiance of the international community. We'll be asking what more, if anything, can be done to rein in Pyongyang. Also tonight, President Trump flies into Texas to assess for himself the damage done by the devastating tropical storm Harvey.
This is historic, it's epic what happened, but you know what? It happened in Texas, and Texas can handle anything.
Record rainfall, more than 4 foot of water has fallen since Friday, and there's still much more to come. Here, the government's accused of being too timid in its plans for greater transparency on corporate pay. And they've finally done it. Drama at Headingley as West Indies win a test in England for the first time in 17 years.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, defending champion Angelique Kerber has been knocked out of the US Open, beaten by Japanese teenager Naomi Osaka.
Good evening. President Trump says all options are now on the table after North Korea fired a ballistic missile over Japan last night. Japan's Prime Minister says his country is now facing an unprecedented threat. China has warned that the crisis is now at a tipping point. The missile, which potentially has the power to carry a nuclear warhead, was fired eastward from near Pyongyang at 6 in the morning local time. It flew over Japan's Hokkaido Island before crashing into the sea 700 miles off the Japanese coast. Sirens blared out and text messages were sent across northern Japan warning people in the missile's flight path to take cover. Our first report tonight is from Rupert Wingfield-Hayes in Tokyo.
This is how people in northern Japan were awoken at just after 6 this morning. A missile is passing, the announcer says. A missile is passing. Please find shelter immediately. At City Hall, there are frantic phone calls. Is there any damage? This is not a practice. This is real. A North Korean missile has just flown overhead. My phone was by my bed, says this woman. Suddenly it started ringing with alerts. I was really shocked. We have nowhere to escape to, says this man. That's the scariest thing. The missile that flew over Japan is thought to be one of these, a Hwasong-12. It was first seen at this huge parade in Pyongyang in April. A month later, North Korea shocked the world by successfully firing one into outer space. Today it has gone much further, forcing a grim-faced Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to address the nation.
This missile flight over Japan is an outrageous act and a critical threat that we have not seen before.
There will be many who say this North Korean missile launch is all about politics, that it's North Korean brinkmanship. And they're probably right. But it's not much consolation if you live here underneath it. This was an extremely aggressive act by Pyongyang, and it sends a very disturbing message to people here in Japan.
It can now hit Tokyo with nuclear weapons. It can hit Okinawa with nuclear weapons. You know, if you don't want to keep this game of escalation, we might want to sit down and start talking to each other.
But right now, talking is the last thing on anyone's mind here. Today, South Korea sent F-15 fighter jets to bomb targets just south of the demilitarized zone. American heavy bombers could follow next. Each side now feels compelled to flex its military might. And so the spiral of tension is wound up yet again. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
Well, tonight an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council is getting underway in New York, with America calling for serious action to deal with North Korea's nuclear missile program. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, is on her way to Japan tonight on a planned trip. She condemned the missile firing as reckless provocation. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landell looks at the options left for the international community.
This is a crisis showing little sign of resolution. North Korea has now tested more than 20 missiles this year alone, and the aim of the country's leader is simple: to be able to fire a nuclear weapon wherever he wants. The main escalation came in July, when it tested 2 long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles, potentially able to reach the US mainland, prompting this.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
In response, North Korea threatened to strike Guam, the US island territory in the Pacific. After today's test, the now familiar words of condemnation.
These are illegal tests, we strongly condemn them, and we will be working with Japan and other international partners to ensure that pressure is put on North Korea to stop this illegal action.
This evening, diplomats are meeting in emergency session at the United Nations, once again asking what can be done to change North Korea's behaviour. President Trump said all options were on the table. This was his ambassador.
No country should have missiles flying over them like those 130 million people in Japan. It's unacceptable. They have violated every single UN Security Council resolution that we've had. And so I think something serious has to happen.
So what are the options? There could be more diplomacy, with the tough talk in public matched with quieter discussions in private. But North Korea shows no sign it's ready to listen. The international community could impose stricter sanctions, but experts say these will bite only if they stop the flow of oil and money from China. And the least likely option is military action, as any attempt to destroy North Korea's nuclear capability could lead to massive retaliation against South Korea.
I think the bottom line is there is no magic bullet. No one of these options is going to deliver the outcome that the Americans want. We will need some sort of coordinated, combined response.
And for now, that's not happening. The US and South Korea are carrying out military exercises that presume an invasion from the north. China and Russia say it is this that's provoked Pyongyang's latest test. And the crisis is now at a tipping point. So the missiles keep flying, North Korea's capability grows, and the international community struggles for a meaningful response. James Landell, BBC News.
Well, let's talk to Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, who is in Tokyo, and that is the big question: how the international community responds.
Yes, Sophie, I agree with what James said there. I mean, we will see the normal sort of noises and the normal process that we've come to be familiar with here: a UN Security Council resolution, more sanctions against North Korea, more pressure from America and its allies on China to do something. But I think realistically, as James said, there are no good options, and it's not perhaps what people want to hear. But the only thing the international community really has to fall back on is the thing that has worked for the last 65 years, since the end of the Korean War. Of course, there will be things like missile defence, more of that, but it really comes down to deterrence. It comes down to the US and its allies, Japan and South Korea, sticking together and sticking to this promise to North Korea that if you attack any of us, you attack all of us. And that if you do so, there will be an overwhelming military response from the United States in particular. That is what has kept the peace in this region on the Korean Peninsula for 65 years. And it's really the thing that underpins stability in this region today. But as James said, these missile tests are testing those alliances, and they are making this situation more and more difficult each time there is an escalation.
Rupert in Tokyo, thank you. President Trump has arrived in Texas to meet officials dealing with the devastating flooding in the wake of Tropical Storm Harvey. More than 4 foot of rain has now fallen in Houston, Texas, since the storm swept in on Friday. More than 30,000 people have been forced from their homes by the storm. 2 dams near the city have begun overflowing, and a river has burst its banks. It's set a new record for rainfall in the state. The dark blue areas on this map showing where the rain has been falling most heavily. And the authorities are warning that water levels will continue to rise. Our correspondent James Cook is in Houston for us now.
Yes, Sophie, I'm standing between those two reservoirs which are flooding more than 3,000 homes in this area alone. At least 11 people are now known to have died. And incredibly, Harris County, which includes Houston and 4.5 million people, is said to be 30% flooded.
He's not the only one finding it tough. It's now 4 days since the hurricane, and still the rescues roll on and on.
We're trying to get to a safer, drier place, so.
How's the baby doing?
Oh, he's fine. He's just scared.
Are you scared?
Just a little bit, yeah.
In the chaos, though, there is some order. The boats have come from all over the United States, and not a moment too soon.
There are a lot of people that need help, and I'm thankful for these people. Really am. Because I've never been through anything like this.
This operation was fast and smooth. Police, soldiers, civilians, all working together. From above, they can see the problem, and it's a big one. A reservoir a few blocks away is overflowing. It was built 80 years ago to protect the young city of Houston, but no one then imagined this.
The pool of the reservoir is still rising, so flooding is going to continue along the structures and the homes that are against the western edge of the pool. So streets are going to be flooding. They will continue to flood. New streets will continue to flood. New homes will continue to flood.
Well, this is now what much of Houston and its surrounding suburbs look like. It's eerie here. Everyone seems to have fled. And although the scale of this disaster is striking, it may yet get worse. Much of this water will eventually work its way downstream to the city itself, where they're already struggling to cope.
This shelter ran out of beds yesterday. Since then, 4,000 more people have arrived. And even that is just a fraction of the number looking for a haven.
When it's raining outside, some people can't imagine a sunny day. And it's been raining for a week. So imagine what's in people's minds.
The lines are so big and so long. We need more physicians, more doctors, we need more health care for everybody in the whole facility.
For Houston and for the US, this is a wake-up yell. A giant of global commerce has been paralysed. Should the city have been evacuated? The mayor says no.
You cannot put 6.5 million people on the road 2 days before a storm that you don't know where it is going. It is absurd.
But the fabric of this city is now tearing. Even motorways are giving way. And as more deaths are reported, including one police officer, the strain is beginning to show.
Once our dive team got there, it was too treacherous to go under and look for him. So we made a decision to leave officers there waiting until the morning, because as much as we wanted to recover him last night, we could not put more officers at risk for what we knew in our hearts was going to be a recovery mission.
Every hour brings news of more rescues, more people trapped, more damage. With nearly 50 inches of rain, this is now a record-breaking disaster. James Cook, BBC News, Houston.
Well, President Trump flew into Texas a few hours ago to assess for himself the damage caused by the massive storm. He's been meeting emergency workers in Corpus Christi, where the storm first hit on Friday. Donald Trump said he wanted the relief effort to stand as an example of how to respond to a storm. Our North America editor John Sopel reports from Texas.
A commander-in-chief determined to show that he is in command. President Trump arrived in Corpus Christi this lunchtime, the city where Hurricane Harvey made landfall. And the crowds had gathered outside the fire station to hear him. He'd come to offer comfort and support.
Thank you, everybody.
Though it sounded more like a campaign rally.
This is historic. It's epic what happened. But you know what? It happened in Texas, and Texas can handle anything. Thank you all, folks. Thank you. Thank you.
And with a flourish, he produced the flag of the Lone Star State. To the crowd's delight. Earlier, he met the Texas Governor Greg Abbott and praised the cooperation between state and federal government.
We won't say congratulations. We don't want to do that. don't want to congratulate. We'll congratulate each other when it's all finished.
Contrast that with 12 years ago and the disastrous handling of Hurricane Katrina and this utterly tone-deaf comment from then President Bush to his emergency relief coordinator.
And Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. The FEMA director's working 24 hours.
Actually, it was one heck of a mess. Nearly 2,000 people died, and in New Orleans it was particularly bad. There was an evacuation, but it seemed that all those who were left behind were black. President Bush's reputation wouldn't recover. The response to Harvey has been more sure-footed so far. Across this vast state, damage is being assessed. We went to La Grange.
So how far has it moved?
Only close there.
So your home has moved across the street?
This mother too shows her children where their house once stood.
This is just one small town in Texas, and it's estimated that some 500 homes have been destroyed here. At this trailer park, you can see that particular house has been uprooted, fallen on top of a car. And if we just move across, you can see the water bubbling up from the ground. That's because there is a cracked gas line underneath. And for the emergency services, it means it is still too dangerous to investigate.
We're still in the foothills of this disaster. Thousands will remain homeless for months to come. There's an economic reckoning to be had. Will Congress agree to fund the rebuilding? And the biggest question of them all, as Louisiana stands next in the path, has Tropical Storm Harvey done his worst, or is there more devastation to come?
Well, John is in Austin, where President Trump has just been visiting. And John, all eyes on how the president deals with this. How much is riding on it for him?
Well, Sophie, you started your bulletin tonight with the situation in North Korea. That is undoubtedly the biggest international challenge that Donald Trump faces. But if you look at the domestic scene, well, this is undoubtedly the biggest thing he has yet had to deal with since he took office in January. And so far, you'd have to say he's handling it very well. In terms of the immediate aftermath of the storm, he was pulling all the levers of government that he could to make sure that the federal rescue effort was in harmony with what was happening at state level as well. You say he's been here today and he's just due to leave from this airport very shortly. He was also very careful to avoid the criticism that he was diverting resources away from where the rescue and recovery effort was underway. So he went to Corpus Christi, where the situation is not too bad, and has come here to Austin, which is where the rescue is being coordinated from, without getting in the way, without diverting resources. So I think he has been sensitive to that as well, and he says he's coming back on Saturday to revisit, to see the progress that is being made. But as I said, there is still an awful long way to go. There is a huge reckoning to be had about the economic cost, about the human cost of this disaster. And whilst for the moment he seems to have avoided some of the pitfalls that George W. Bush fell into, well, there is still a very long way to go. And Donald Trump knows that the favourable reports he's getting now might not last if things start to go wrong.
John Sopel in Texas, thank you. Here, Theresa May has been accused of watering down plans to tackle excessive executive pay. From next June, Britain's biggest firms will have to reveal how much more their chief executives are paid compared with the average worker. But critics have called the government's attempt to make boardrooms more transparent and accountable feeble and not as radical as originally planned. Here's our business editor, Simon Jack.
A leadership and an election pitch to a party and a public that had lost faith in big business.
We all know that in recent years the reputation of business as a whole has been bruised. That when a minority of businesses and business figures appear to game the system and work to a different set of rules. I'm putting you on warning. This can't go on anymore. A change has got to come, and this party is going to make it.
Since then, promises have been gradually shelved. A pledge to put workers on company boards was dropped, as was a plan to give shareholders a binding annual vote on executive pay. However, by forcing companies to publish the difference between its top earner and its average earner, this government has gone further than previous ones.
When boards are setting pay and when they're disclosing pay, they shouldn't do it just with an eye on pay in the board, but they should look at pay across the company and be prepared to set out publicly how they can justify boardroom pay in the context of the pay that the rest of the workforce get.
Those numbers could prove embarrassing. Last year, the average boss of a top 100 company made £4.5 million in total pay. That's 129 times as much as his or her average employee. And that's compared to 20 years ago, when the boss earned only 47 times as much as the average worker.
This is an important development. We haven't been able to track the gap between top pay and the rest without these pay ratios based on good data. No government has put this through before. And the truth is, if you want to know how much a fat cat weighs, you do have to put them on the scales every now and again.
There's already some evidence that the pay gap between the top floor and the shop floor is beginning to narrow, and this extra transparency can only help that. But for many, today's package of reforms falls a long way short of the big business shake-up that was promised by a leader trying to portray the Conservatives as the party of the worker, not just of the boss.
The Prime Minister has broken repeated promises to tackle boardroom greed, to put workers on the board and shake up corporate culture. And instead, she's delivered a feeble package of proposals.
Business groups were generally supportive of today's proposals, perhaps glad that promises made in the bubble of campaigning can often be hard to deliver in the real world. Simon Jack, BBC News.
A brief look at some of the day's other news stories now, and investigations are continuing into the death of a 4-year-old boy in Devon. The youngster's body was found in the swimming pool of an activity centre after he had been reported missing. He'd been on holiday. The head of Network Rail has apologised after passengers travelling into London Waterloo, the UK's busiest railway station, face yet more delays. The station had reopened today after 3 weeks of engineering works, but rush hour services on several lines into Waterloo this morning were cancelled after signalling problems. The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, has told the British government that none of its Brexit position papers is satisfactory and an enormous amount needs to be settled before talks on a trade deal can begin. One of the key issues Brussels wants to agree on first is the status of more than 3.5 million EU nationals who live and work in the UK. Our correspondent Emma Simpson has been talking to some of them about their concerns.
David Lenihan runs a small family business in Blackburn, repairing and revamping old industrial parts. He says his foreign staff are crucial. There's Amilcar from Spain and Lucas from Poland, Ramadan's from Bulgaria, Arunas from Lithuania. There's Denisa from Slovakia and finally Lisa, who moved here 2 years ago from France.
Am I allowed to stay, or should I have to go back to France? I have no idea, really. My future is between the hands of the politics. They decide, not me. And so that's quite stressful.
So, what's the UK offering? If an EU national has lived for more than 5 years in the UK, they'll be able to apply for what's called settled status. They'll be able to live, work and access benefits. If they've lived here for fewer than 5 years, they can apply to stay to reach settled status. The cut-off date will be no later than March the 29th, 2019, although it's yet to be specified. It's not clear, though, what will happen in the long term to any EU national who arrives after Brexit. Irish citizens aren't affected. For the EU, the UK's proposals need more than just a bit of fine-tuning. They want EU nationals in the UK to have the same protection as other EU citizens. There are worries over eligibility, the cut-off date. They want more precise guarantees. The big stumbling block, though, is over who will enforce the new rules.
UK says, look, these are basically UK immigration law rights, should be enforced by the British courts, and the British courts are respected across the world. EU says, actually, these EU nationals have moved under EU law and their rights should be protected through the EU mechanisms, the Commission and the Court of Justice.
So what's the view from this factory floor? Most EU staff here don't seem fazed by the uncertainty.
The Brexit won't change my plans because I know I can provide here a better future for my daughter.
They're selling more stuff abroad thanks to the fall in the pound, but there's a shortage of staff.
Last year we did 132 countries, and language is a key selling point for us. If we can speak the local language, we can get a sale. Blackbird's not really that inundated with language speaking staff, so since Brexit we found it hard to find people really.
One Italian employee has already left. The rest here want to keep clocking on. They just want to know what the deal is going to be. Emma Simpson, BBC News, Blackburn.
Well, the latest round of Brexit talks are continuing in Brussels. Our Europe correspondent Damien Grammaticus is there. And EU nationals is one key area. Another big one, money, what the UK will pay.
Sophie, yes, and this is the issue, I think, that could be most likely to scupper the entire process, and the one around which tensions are really starting to rise. Now, the EU believes that it has an agreement on how these talks should happen, that currently they should focus on the legacy issues, so those citizens' rights, money, things like that, moving on to a trade deal in future. The UK has made clear, David Davis and Number 10, they are impatient. They want to get on with those trade talks immediately, saying there are issues that need to be sorted out now. The EU side has produced papers laying out how that money those bills could be calculated. The UK side hasn't produced papers. David Davis doesn't want to be tied down. And what's happened in there today is that the UK negotiators have been going through challenging the EU to provide legal justifications for those sums. That, I think, is leading to tensions on the EU side. And remember, Jean-Claude Juncker says, and he's repeated it today, that there will be no move to trade talks unless the EU is satisfied on all of these legacy issues. So the stakes are really rising.
Indeed. Damien, thank you. Cricket now, and the West Indies have won a test in England for the first time in 17 years in a dramatic final day at Headingley. Shai Hope led the way to a 5-wicket win as he became the first batsman to score hundreds in both innings of a first-class match at the ground. Patrick Geary watched the action.
At Headingley, they take history seriously. It stares back at you from every head and headline. Who will be next to make their mark? England began the day as big favourites, but this is the test that just kept surprising. Alistair Cook rarely drops these. Craig Brathwaite reprieved. And he was again here, but Stuart Broad inadvertently condemned the other batsman, Kyle Hope. 2 down the moment Hope ran out. Or not. West Indies were mocked before this test, written off even last night, but were making a point with every run. Shai Hope and Brathwaite were taking this away from England, but had Moeen Ali turned it back? Brathwaite 95 and finally out. So to the final session of the test. England needs 7 wickets to win, the West Indies 122 runs. Predictions are futile. A time for heroes, even unlikely ones. What about substitute fielder Mason Crane? What a catch. 6 wickets remaining. England couldn't get the important one. Shai Hope made 100 for the second time in the match. Unprecedented on this ground. Others helped, but it was fitting that he scored the runs which secured victory before time ran out. On a day of hope and history at Headingley. Patrick Geary, BBC News in Leeds.
And finally, she starred as Queen Victoria in the critically acclaimed film Mrs. Brown. Now, 2 decades later, Dame Judi Dench is playing Victoria once again, this time as the ageing monarch in the final years of her life. Victoria and Abdul tells the true story of the close but controversial friendship which grew between the Queen and an Indian clerk who'd been sent to present her with a gift for her Golden Jubilee. Our arts editor Will Gompertz reports.
OK, stand by. On set for the filming of Victoria and Abdul.
1, 2, 3, action.
Director Stephen Frear's latest movie, starring Judi Dench as the octogenarian queen and Ali Fazal as a young Indian clerk with whom she develops a surprisingly special relationship.
Rani? Rani?
You're playing Victoria at the age she was. You're at the age of Victoria. Yes, so the age you are now is the age Victoria
She was that I am.
You are. Yes, so you're at the age she was. That's what I'm trying to say. Can you relate to that relationship she's having with Abdul? Do you understand it?
Yes, I think I do. But then I've always been a rather susceptible person. So I understand that very much indeed. I think she was looking for somebody that she didn't have to be formal with.
But whatever you do, you must not look at Her Majesty.
Do you think she fell in love with him?
Well, I suppose. Why not? He's so beautiful.
Could you fall in love with
I mean, what is he?
Somebody in their 30s?
Yes.
Oh, I expect so. What is it?
A mango, Your Majesty.
One moment, Your Majesty.
It's off. Sir Henry, this mango is off.
Of all the things you've done, of all the parts you've played, which has been your favourite?
I loved playing Cleopatra because when I said I was going to do it, people were openly quite rude. You know, they said, Cleopatra, is that your part? I never thought that I would be in a Bond film. And I had the most glorious time bossing him about and sitting behind that desk. I loved it, loved it. I was so lonely.
Victoria and Abdul is based on a true, if little-known story. A slice of Victorian history about class, race and religious intolerance that speaks to today's multicultural Britain.
He's an Indian, Your Majesty.
And I am the Queen of England.
Will Gompertz, BBC News.
And that is almost it from us. Newsnight is coming up on BBC Two. Here's Emily.
Tonight, Hurricane Harvey becomes a test for the president. Donald Trump lands in Texas as the floodwaters rise. And we ask if the knives are now out for Boris Johnson. Join me now on BBC Two.
Meanwhile, here on BBC One, it is time for the news where you are. Good night.